We would have to wait until the beginning of the 20th century for this bust to be discovered among the ruins of the ancient town of Amarna for Nefertiti to become famous once again. This is quite a comeback for a woman whose contemporaries swore they would make her disappear from the history books. In their eyes, she was guilty of having brought about chaos in the kingdom in the wake of her husband, Akhenaten. But who was she? And what was her true role over the course of such a unique period in Egyptian history? Nefertiti has been fascinating, dividing and setting Egyptologists' brain on edge for over a century. On the 26th of November, 1922, the British Egyptologist Howard Carter discovered Pharaoh Tutankhamun's intact tomb, unearthing one of the most tremendous archaeological treasures of all time. Tutankhamun was but a child when he assumed the throne of the Kingdom of Egypt over 3,300 years ago. This final heir of a family that ruled over Egypt for 8 generations was a descendant of some of the most fascinating characters in the whole of antiquity. The pharaoh queen Hatshepsut, Amenhotep III, the master builder, and the mysterious Akhenaten. For Egyptologists, this family constitutes the 18th dynasty, which saw Egypt become the richest and most powerful kingdom in the world. Here is the story of this incredible golden age, the story of the founders of the new empire.
Nefertiti was represented as the personification of female beauty for Egyptians of the time. She was the most beautiful Egyptian woman.
More than 3 millennia after her death, Nefertiti has, once again, become the personification of beauty itself for a completely different audience. German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt rediscovered this exceptional bust in 1912 while he was working at the ruins of the town of Amarna. He immediately wrote down his impressions.
Farben wie eben aufgelegt. Beschreiben nützt nichts. Ansehen. He is writing it in German that the colors are so fresh, like actually applied to the bust, and he says, okay, there is no help to describe it. You have to look at it.
Nefertiti is a character that has fascinated the West since we rediscovered her, and we must recognize that she escapes us greatly in her roles as woman and mother. Her political role, however, is well staged and therefore relatively easy to grasp.
Nefertiti appeared in history around 1342 before Common Era, when she married Pharaoh Amenhotep IV, the future Akhenaten. Her beauty very quickly established itself across the kingdom.
We can call Nefertiti the star of the age. Nefertiti was everywhere. We have as many representations of Nefertiti as we do Akhenaten.
But what do we really know about Nefertiti and her life? Who was she before she became the Queen of Egypt, whose image still fascinates us?
The name Nefertiti means the beautiful one has come, so we have sometimes assumed a foreign origin.
The first Egyptologists initially thought that young Nefertiti was a princess from Mitanni, a kingdom located on the border of modern-day Syria, Iraq, and Turkey. Before becoming the great royal wife of Akhenaten, this princess would have belonged to the harem of her father, Pharaoh Amenhotep III.
But that point of view is completely gratuitous and useless, because Nefertiti is a purely Egyptian name. There is no reason to have her come from abroad.
Nowadays, we consider Nefertiti as being well and truly Egyptian. Her name, the Beautiful One Has Come, echoes the goddess Hathor, one of the oldest deities in Egypt. This goddess of love and beauty was herself nicknamed the Returning Beauty, like the Nile flood, whose arrival she triggered every year.
Nefertiti alludes to the goddess Hathor, who is the companion, the female component that completes the figure of the sun god. And if the king is a kind of an incarnation of the sun god, he must, of course, have his Hathor, if you will, in the form of Nefertiti.
The name Nefertiti was therefore engraved into Egyptian tradition, and it was a name that was predestined to become Queen of Egypt. But her name aside, what else do we know about her and her roots? Our search begins in the remains of Akhenaten's town, now known as Tel El Amarna, in the very place where Nefertiti and her husband founded their new capital more than 3,300 years ago. Mark Gabold is an Egyptologist. He has spent the last 30 years patiently tracing back this queen's identity. He believes that the clues that teach us the most about Nefertiti's family can be found in a tomb in the Amarna necropolis, the tomb of a so-called Ai.
Here we have a representation of Ai, who was a very great dignitary of Akhenaten's court, and who bore the title of favored by the perfect God, the divine father Ai. And divine father means that he was considered as a father for the king in a way, either due to his moral authority or because he was a member of his family.
But what else can this title of Divine Father or Father of God teach us? Who usually bore it?
We know that the king's father-in-law was called Father of God, which is a hugely significant Egyptologist argument in favor of this hypothesis that Ai could have been Nefertiti's father. That's personally what I think.
To the great displeasure of Egyptologists, Nefertiti never seems to have made the identity of her parents clear. They are therefore reduced to mixing and matching sources to form their beliefs.
So Ai could have been her father. And this is his wife, the favored one of the perfect God, the nursemaid of the great royal wife Nefertiti, Te. We are certain that Te was the queen's nurse. She was not called the queen's mother, so she was not the queen's mother, but she was her nurse.
But it may be a little bit more complicated than that. If we imagine the king and queen playing the role of practically fully fledged gods, we can't present human people as being the parents of gods. So Nefertiti's mother would be presented as the person who breastfed her. It's a metaphorical way to say it's her mother.
The divine father, Ai, may then be Nefertiti's father. As for Te, she was her nurse, and maybe even her mother. Today, this theory is convincing more and more specialists, despite there not being any traces of writing to prove it. Nevertheless, Egyptologists are certain about other aspects of Nefertiti's family. For example, they know she had a younger sister.
Her name was Nefertiti, which is a very traditional name. She is depicted here as the sister of the great royal wife, and her being depicted in Ai's tomb probably indicates that she is also linked to the family of Ai and his wife Te.
We know that Te and Ai come from the region of Akhmim located in Middle Egypt, where there was a very powerful family of public figures, because this family had already produced the Queen of Egypt, Ti.
Mother of the young pharaoh Amenhotep IV, the future Akhenaten, Ti was the most influential woman in Egypt at that time. She ensured regency of the kingdom for her son for several years.
Ti undoubtedly played a part in Nefertiti's choices, as she was always present throughout the early years of the reign, and maybe even afterwards. She was consulted as a queen mother.
Nefertiti must have been but a young girl when she arrived at the court in Thebes. There is no doubt that she would have first been selected based on physical criteria.
Her official goal, her mission, was to make children. There's the idea of the child that the pharaoh will have with his great royal wife becoming his legitimate successor.
Nevertheless, the role of the lucky woman was not only limited to giving the pharaoh offspring.
She played the role of the essential female who must please both God and her husband, the pharaoh. In any case, her role was very erotic and very sexual from a symbolic point of view. She was supposed to endlessly arouse the god's desire so he didn't lose his procreative power. He created the world, but he must continue to be excited in order to ensure Egypt's longevity.
But although Ti chose this young girl to become her son's great royal wife, family considerations also had to be taken into account. At least, that's what an increasing number of Egyptologists believe.
In fact, when queens had to find wives for their sons who were old enough to get married but still a little young, so undoubtedly easy to manipulate, they would always begin by searching within their own families, which is a good strategy to strengthen ties in the reigning family.
Ti and her powerful family group, who came from the region of Akhmim, would have used this strategy countless times. In 2010, genetic analyses were carried out on mummies from the 18th dynasty found in the Valley of the Kings. They showed that Ti and her husband, Pharaoh Amenhotep III, were not just husband and wife, they were first cousins. Ti's father and Amenhotep III's mother were brother and sister and belonged to the famous family of Akhmim. But what do we know about Nefertiti? Was she also part of this family group? Egyptologists are studying the divine father Ai, the man they suppose to be her father. Was he related to Ti?
There is a strong link between Ai and Akhmim, and since Ti, Amenhotep III's wife and Akhenaten's mother, also came from Akhmim, there's a good chance that they are brother and sister.
In any case, we can see that Ai was an extremely important person in the court, so that would fit well with there being a close link with the family.
If Ai and Ti were brother and sister, Nefertiti would have been the queen's niece and, therefore, her husband Amenhotep IV's first cousin.
It was a way to further strengthen links with the Akhmim family, now over 3 generations. There was a very logical continuity in this alliance between the dynasty and the powerful Akhmim family.
Egyptologists would need to compare the genes of T and I to confirm this hypothesis, but I's mummy has not yet been found.
It's also many things we don't understand. And we have many theories. Every Egyptologist has his own theory about what happened. But I don't believe in the theories. I believe in facts.
While we wait for new discoveries to confirm or disprove archaeologists' intuitions, they do at least agree on other points, especially Nefertiti very quickly becoming essential to her husband.
Nefertiti married Amenhotep IV, the future Akhenaten, in his 4th year. Before that, she was completely absent from all the sources that we have, but she became almost omnipresent from that moment on.
She is always mentioned or depicted by the pharaoh's side in the texts and images that he had made. Their marriage also represented the beginning of the large religious shift that he undertook. Until that point, Amenhotep IV had adored the several Egyptian deities like his ancestors before him, particularly the god Amun, the protector of royalty. This god had an influential clergy that was almost as rich as the crown.
We should bear in mind that Amun's clergy was all-powerful at the time. It was almost a kind of state within the state.
But Amenhotep IV banned the worship of traditional gods when Nefertiti appeared. He abandoned the god Amun and relegated his clergy to a subordinate role.
Akhenaten and Nefertiti were the pharaonic couple that tried to reign without priests. The traditional pharaonic institution of the 18th dynasty had two sides, so to speak. There was the pharaoh on one side and the priest on the other. It was two sides of the same coin.
Nevertheless, Amenhotep IV breached that tradition and decided to go without Amun's clergy, choosing to devote himself to one sole divinity that he called Aten. This divinity was the light produced by the solar disk. This religious questioning and the conflict with Amun's clergy led Amenhotep IV to another decision. It was symbolic and unheard of for a reigning pharaoh. He also included Nefertiti, his great royal wife.
He decided to no longer use his name Amenhotep, which means Amun is satisfied, Amun being the god that initially supported legitimate royalty in Egypt, to become Akhenaten, the one who is useful to Aten. Nefertiti also had her name modified immediately afterwards. But this modification wasn't exactly a name change, but a complement that was added to her name. So she was no longer simply called Nefertiti, but Neferuaten Nefertiti. Neferuaten means perfect is the perfection, or beautiful is the beauty, because it's the same word in Egyptian of Aten. And that shows Nefertiti's ideological role very well. She personifies this perfect beauty of the sun god on earth.
Placed under Aten's protection, even down to her name, Nefertiti was distinctly at the center of Akhenaten's project. Some people see the first historical example of a monotheistic religion in this project.
You have the Aten at the top, so this is the creator god, blessing the prophet of that new religion, Akhenaten, and the female counterpart, which is necessary. Without the female counterpart, nothing would exist.
Now the essential female half to her husband, Nefertiti wasted no time in giving him a numerous descendants. They became the parents of 6 daughters in less than 9 years.
The princesses show this royal couple's productivity. Since they are a kind of human representation of the god Aten's creative capacity, their offspring proves their generative capacity. So, the princesses appear in the reliefs like miniature adults in accordance with Egyptian art conventions at the time.
But respect for convention ended there for Nefertiti and Akhenaten because the royal couple, who were the intermediary between the people and Aten, depicted themselves in artwork with completely renewed codes. Not only were Nefertiti and Akhenaten represented in very astonishing forms for their time, but they especially chose to show themselves during moments which had never been depicted until that point. In the Egyptian Museum, Egyptologist Salima Ikram deciphers this new style that was created when Nefertiti entered Akhenaten's life.
At this time period, each house had a shrine. And in the shrine, instead of an image of a god, you had the royal family. And what's unusual is you would think, the king, the queen, all looking formal. But no, you see the Aten blessing their royal family, and they're shown here beautifully as a family. And unusually, they're shown, like live children who are saying, pay attention to me, do this, do that. So you can see the kid reaching up to its mother, the other one saying, no, pay attention to me, not to my sister. Someone else saying, Papa, do this, dangling little toys. It's such a lively, real scene showing family life. This is a unique moment in Egyptian history. Not before and certainly not after do you see this kind of, casualness in the royal family and intimacy being depicted.
They are represented in artwork that played with new codes. In other words, we feel like we're there seeing them hold hands, hug each other, touch each other on the head, and even kiss and play with their children. We obviously know that the historical reality was quite different. We know that these children, like all the royal children of the 18th dynasty, I would almost say all royal children throughout history, had private tutors and nannies. I doubt that Akhenaten and Nefertiti had much time to dedicate to caring for their children's education and guidance on a daily basis.
This staging of the couple and the family, which would not exist without Nefertiti, continues to intrigue Egyptologists even today.
For 2,000 plus years, the Egyptians had had this very formalized way of dealing with deities. So this was a complete change for people, to have this king who looks like sort of a jolly family man, just like they themselves were. It's very hard to understand what was going on in Akhenaten's mind or that of his advisors, because this is one of the weirdest mixtures of religion and PR that we have encountered.
We have what we can call a screen for propaganda. We can't completely know what Nefertiti really thought of all that. What we are sure of is that her husband used her image in displays that teach us a lot about the official ideology. But we can't really find out anything about real life from them.
In around 1338 before Common Era, in the 8th year of the reign, the royal family and the whole court moved to Akhenaten's new desired capital city in the center of Egypt. The city, whose current name is Tel El Amarna, was christened Akhenaten and was the perfect setting to have all eyes focused on Nefertiti and her husband.
There was a large palace in the center of the city where the king and queen Nefertiti worked during the day. That was where they received their guests and granted audiences to civil servants. And there was another palace 2.5 kilometers to the north of the palace in the city center, which is the palace where the pharaoh and the queen spent the night. That allowed the king and queen to travel every day.
We can still see what these daily traditional journeys looked like in the tombs surrounding the old city. Nefertiti and her husband made them before the eyes of their people who gathered to catch a glimpse of them.
The city of Tell el-Amarna extended over a dozen or so kilometers from north to south with palaces, sanctuaries, and altars to make offerings. The best way to travel was to travel by chariot. Apart from the distance, there was also the fact that the king, whose person was sacred, was only supposed to set foot on floors that were as pure as he was. Floors that were pure for the king were palaces and temples. I would say that he wouldn't step on the ground between the spaces because he was generally on his chariot. And Nefertiti was the same.
Today, we can but guess what Nefertiti's silhouette looked like on her chariot. Her face and even her hands were hammered a long time ago when Akhenaten's religious freeform ended. But what remains of this fresco very clearly shows one of the rare privileges that Nefertiti enjoyed.
We didn't see any women depicted in chariots before that. So we have a sort of knot of equality, because you can see that the queen's chariot was a little smaller, but of inevitable parallelism between Akhenaten's kingdom and Nefertiti's kingdoms that accompanied him. So they shared, not in equal parts, but they shared royal characteristics.
Nefertiti and Akhenaten also shared the services of the royal artists, so Egyptians across the kingdom could see the features of their sovereigns who were the incarnation of Aten. Queen Nefertiti and her perfect beauty were their muse. This is Thutmose. Today, we would call him the official portrait artist of the court. But his favorite art form was not drawing, but sculpture. Once he had finished his drafts, the sculptor would leave the palace to go to his workshop located a few kilometers away.
We know he lived in quite a chic neighborhood. His neighbor was the chief general of the police force of Amarna, we could say. So it was quite an important residential area. We know he had a chariot, which is an obvious sign of economic and social wealth because there were stables to house his horses. It's actually thanks to a horse blinder with his name on it that we know his titles, where he's presented as a sculptor and commissioner of works.
There's a nice piece of granite. If we walk around, we can see stones which aren't local stones, such as granite from Aswan, sandstone from Jebel el-Silsila, quartzite. We have small fragments that show that these materials really were worked here. And these are the bricks from the 14th century before the Common Era, which were made in Akhenaten's time. They're original bricks from the house.
It was during a German excavation campaign in 1912 that archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt unearthed Thutmose's workshop in Amarna.
Borchardt had the area cleared on December 6, 1912, and he discovered a set of plaster and stone models which visibly depicted members of the royal family. And in that very spot, there was an upturned bust. It had fallen upside down with the crown facing downwards. So all he could see at the beginning was the base of an upturned bust. But when he removed it, it was an intact Nefertiti. It only had a few pieces of ear missing, which he quickly recovered. And the bust was sent to Berlin, where it remained relatively hidden for over a decade. And it wasn't until 1922 and 1923 that it would finally be exhibited to the public. And we can see that this woman really was very beautiful, and her beauty was timeless.
Since then, Nefertiti has become an icon of the Egyptian Museum in Berlin, where her bust is exhibited in its own room and almost 1 million visitors come to admire it each year. Friederike Seefried, Egyptologist and director of the museum, has the honor and responsibility of watching over this exceptional sculpture and the memories of its discovery.
Yeah, that's the digging diary of Ludwig Borchardt. And like it was the normal way, the participants of the digging mission, they wrote down every day what they did and what they found. And here we have the entries of the 6th of December 1912, and on page 43 he made a short sketch of the bust of Nefertiti, 47 centimeters high. And he is writing it in German that the colors are so fresh, like actually applied to the bust. And he says, there is no help to describe it, you have to look at it. That shows that he himself was astonished about the brightness of the colors of that piece.
When we read Borchardt's writings, he literally fell in love with the colored queen, as he calls her. He was fascinated by the beauty of the features attributed to Nefertiti, which corresponded. It's a kind of historical coincidence to the aesthetic and art nouveau of the time.
Ludwig Borchardt did not only find the bust of this colored queen in Thutmose's workshop at the plot in Amarna. He unearthed dozens of other plaster and stone sculptures depicting Nefertiti and the royal family. The other centerpiece is a bust of Akhenaten of the same size as Nefertiti's, but it is in worse condition and has lost almost all its color.
This bust of Akhenaten is kept in Berlin, like Nefertiti's bust, but it has a double which is kept in the Louvre, and which proves that reference busts were made in ancient Egypt, so that Akhenaten and Nefertiti were always represented with the same faces in the different workshops throughout the kingdom.
Nefertiti's bust may therefore have been the official model of the queen made in Thutmose's workshops during the period when the court was located in Amarna. But was this portrait a true reflection of Nefertiti's appearance? A curator at the Museum of Berlin did an experiment a few years ago whereby he projected a proportion grid similar to the one used by Egyptian artists onto a replica of the bust. This grid was measured in fingers, the unit of the time, which measured precisely 1.875 centimeters.
He was surprised to see that all of the features on Nefertiti's face fell on a line or intersection of lines on the grid measured in the unit of the time. And we know very well that there are practically never symmetrical faces in human reality. That proves that Nefertiti can't have looked like that, and that her portrait has been mathematized. In fact, it's been constructed exactly as if software such as Photoshop had been used, which we now use today for models and advertisements. We can imagine that she was undoubtedly very beautiful, but she couldn't have been as perfect as Thutmose created her in his famous bust.
Nefertiti therefore did not exactly resemble this image, but if we trust the qualifiers which systematically accompanied her name, she must have been a very charming woman nevertheless. The texts describe her as the one for whom the king's heart rejoices in his house, the one whom Aten gets up to love and give glory to, and the one whose voice and forms delight. Nevertheless, Nefertiti was not Akhenaten's only love, however perfect and delightful she was.
We know full well that Akhenaten had other secondary wives, including a real harem.
One of the wives of Akhenaten, whose name we do know, is Kia. And her name is unusual. It sounds as if she might have been a foreigner.
Kia is someone who has been widely written about in Egyptology because we've realized that she played an important role in the pharaoh's harem. In order to seal unions with sovereigns who were political partners at the time, the kings of Egypt would systematically marry their daughters and their sisters.
Kia may have been the daughter of the king of Mitanni before becoming one of the king of Egypt's wives.
Kia had her titles, and she was really the beloved wife of Akhenaten. She didn't have the same kind of honors as Nefertiti did, but she was clearly quite favored because her name crops up again and again on objects that we find at Tel el Amarna.
Nefertiti therefore has to put up with the presence of Kia and probably several other women throughout her married life.
So, the Aten iconography depicted the official couple, Akhenaten and Nefertiti, with Nefertiti as the great royal wife, and Akhenaten and Nefertiti's union showed the love that Aten filled the world with in the same way as his rays and beauty. And Kia's presence obviously shows that this imagery is only a projection of the ideology and that Akhenaten must have shared his heart between at least Nefertiti and Kia, and maybe even other women. It's a projection that we wanted to read into romantically, but I don't think that makes much sense in ancient Egypt.
Nevertheless, Nefertiti probably had a chance to definitively get the upper hand over all these other women in the 12th year of her husband's reign. That year, Akhenaten convened the princes dominated by Egypt and who came to pay their annual tribute in his new capital. Nefertiti was at the center of these celebrations. After having given him 6 children, more and more experts think that she was then expecting a 7th child, Prince Tutankhaten, the future Tutankhamun.
Although it seems clear that Tutankhamun's father was Akhenaten, who was his mother? And this is something that has perplexed scholars. So some people have put forward initially that there was another wife of Akhenaten called Kia, who was actually the mother of Tutankhamun. Another theory that is very popular is that Nefertiti was the mother of Tutankhamun.
Kia is quite regularly associated with a child that is systematically a girl. So I'm convinced that Tutankhamun, who was born Tutankhaten, was the 7th child of the royal couple Akhenaten and Nefertiti.
Science tried to bring an answer to the experts' disagreements and resolve the mystery of the identity of Tutankhamun's mother in 2010. Professor Zahi Hawass directed this research on the royal mummies of the 18th dynasty. He tells us how he and his teams proceeded.
I began to collect all the mummies that we have of the family. We have the mummy of Yuya and Tuya. Yuya and Tuya were the father of Queen T. We have the mummy of Amenhotep III. We have the mummy of Tutankhamun. But we have suspect mummies.
These suspect mummies included 2 women found together in a tomb in the Valley of the Kings in 1898. The first, christened the Elder Lady, was around 60 when she passed away. By comparing her genetic heritage to that of mummies already authenticated, Zahi Hawass and his teams were able to formally identify her as being Queen T, as she is both the daughter of Yuya and Tuya and the grandmother of Tutankhamun.
this Queen T with the beautiful hair. The hair of Queen T made everyone in Cairo to talk about this hair.
The other suspect mummy was a young woman, aged between 25 and 35 when she died. She is nicknamed the Young Lady, and the genetic analysis spoke for themselves here too.
And we found out the younger lady, she was the mother of Tutankhamun, actually, but no name.
Although the DNA does not allow us to give her a name, it gives other clues about her identity.
She was the daughter of Amenhotep III and Queen T. Means Akhenaten married his own sister. That's new. But I found out actually that we have no name for her. But we know that Amenhotep III and Queen T had 5 daughters. This could be one of them.
According to Zahi Hawass, Tutankhamun's mother is thus neither Nefertiti or Kia, but one of Akhenaten's sisters. Nevertheless, other renowned Egyptologists have drawn radically different conclusions from the same data.
If we look at the DNA now, it looks like the DNA of a brother and sister. But if we go into more detail, the team didn't account for there being marriages within families.
The analysis also confirmed that T and Amenhotep III were definitely first cousins because their parents were brother and sister. But if T and I were also brother and sister, like these experts believe, Nefertiti and Akhenaten were also first cousins.
If we look at it from a genetics perspective, it's impossible to tell the difference between uterine brothers and sisters and double cousins from a biological point of view. So people who are cousins on their father's side and their mother's side, because they have the same second-generation ancestors, they actually have the same genetic baggage.
For these experts, Zahi Hawass's analyses clearly show that the young lady was Tutankhamun's mother, but they think that she is the very same Nefertiti.
The DNA opens up this possibility, but doesn't make it compulsory. We could see it as being a brother and sister, but we could also clearly show it being 2 double cousins coming from marriages between first cousins.
Although the identity of Tutankhamun's mother is still dividing experts, one thing that is certain is that the happiness of this royal family broke, and the sky quickly darkened over Egypt very soon after the birth of Akhenaten's only known son. An epidemic fell over the kingdom, taking down at least 3 of the royal princesses one after another, as well as the queen mother, T. Until recently, Egyptologists were sure that Nefertiti had also succumbed to the epidemic. She seems to have disappeared from all historical sources just as abruptly as she appeared. Meritaten, Nefertiti and Akhenaten's oldest daughter, was promoted to new functions in her place.
The royal family has just been slaughtered. So we're left with Akhenaten, 2 of his daughters, the first and the third, Akhenaten and Meritaten, and then Prince Tutankhamun. In the final documents of Akhenaten's reign, we can see that Meritaten took on a role of the great royal wife.
With Nefertiti gone, specialists assumed that Meritaten had replaced her mother and exercised in power with Akhenaten, power that she was thought to keep after her father's death.
Akhenaten's successor was expected to be Meritaten, his oldest daughter. And of course, that was all shaken up with the arrival of Tutankhamun. But it's likely that Meritaten decided to reign for herself rather than simply preparing the way for her younger brother, who was 4 or 5 when Akhenaten died.
Egypt was in a state of doubt when Akhenaten died. There was an epidemic and a series of deaths, but the kingdom also suffered its first military defeat in a century against the Hittites in Syria-Palestine.
And it seems to be Meritaten who managed the crisis, but in any case, we're absolutely certain that there was a female pharaoh between Akhenaten's and Tutankhamun's reigns.
Up until now, most Egyptologists therefore saw Meritaten as the mysterious female pharaoh who firstly shared power with Akhenaten before succeeding him. But a new discovery made by a Belgian team a little under 10 years ago called this whole theory into question. We are going to Deir Abu Hinis, 16 kilometers to the north of Tel El Amarna, with Egyptologist Stephen Harvey to find out more. The stones used to construct the ancient capital of Akhenaten were taken from these cliffs.
So I'm inside this immense limestone quarry. It's really an open gallery, which was not built to be a cave. It really is the remains left behind from the taking out of tens of thousands of blocks. What we have here is an immense column supporting the ceiling of this quarry. And it's much larger than I expected. It's truly huge. And it's a pillar formed from carving out the blocks. And on it, in huge hieroglyphs, about 5 lines of inscription.
Only the experienced eyes of an Egyptologist are able to decipher what we see as an almost rubbed-out trace of ink, which was left there over 33 centuries ago.
Even at this distance, I can see the thing that really brought us here is the very first part, which is the year inscription, the date. It says year 16 in the first month of the inundation season on the 15th day. And it goes on to praise and mention the formal name of King Akhenaten. And in the next line, Nefertiti, the queen, and still called the great royal wife, the king's main wife. It's changing everything. People thought she had died. They thought maybe she was banished to another part of the country. Other people thought that she was replaced by another queen or by her own daughter. And this is extraordinary because before this inscription was discovered, in just the past 10 years, we didn't know that she was still alive.
During this somber period, Akhenaten perhaps feared that his reforms would be extinguished with him. Nefertiti, his great royal wife, was surely the most capable person to carry out his work after him. It is for this reason that some Egyptologists therefore think that, after the deaths of his mother and his children and the military difficulties in the kingdom, he decided to bring Nefertiti into power even more closely than before and to make her a pharaoh queen by his side.
I really believe that Nefertiti, when she became the co-regent, she really had a very important role in the life of this man. She controlled him, and she controlled the country in that time. And in my opinion, she was very strong.
To add to Egyptologists' confusion even more, another pharaoh seems to have appeared and quickly disappeared at that time. His name was Smenkhare.
I don't really believe that Smenkhare is a name existed at all. I believe that the reason that Nefertiti disappeared because she became the co-regent and it changed her name. And after Akhenaten died, she ruled and she was called herself the throne name by Smenkhare.
We have a pharaoh called Smenkhare, and his other name, because the Egyptian pharaohs had more than one, is Nefertiti. But interestingly, this is also a name used by Nefertiti, Nefertiti. So it's more and more clear that Nefertiti is assuming the role of pharaoh in the wake of her husband's death.
The new scenario that some Egyptologists now envisage is that Nefertiti reigned as pharaoh. Her oldest daughter, Meritaten, may have played the complementary female role by her side that was essential to the smooth running of the world.
We have 3 or 4 years there where Egyptologists and historians are not at all in agreement. But an element that almost everyone agrees on is that the pharaoh queen initiated a return towards traditional religion.
The exclusive worship of Aten was abandoned under her reign, which lasted around 3 years. Egyptians progressively reconnected with their traditional deities, and Amun's clergy regained influence and power in Egypt.
But this pharaoh queen was then removed from the official annals. So this period remains one of the most mysterious in Egyptian history until the first year of Tutankhamun, where we begin to have some elements and some certainty once again.
Nefertiti really ended up thumbing her nose at history when she resurfaced from oblivion after more than 3 millennia. But this queen, known for her beauty, and who maybe became pharaoh, kept very many of her mysteries close to her chest. Tutankhamun, a famous name throughout the world. There were 250 kilograms of gold and objects of extraordinary finesse in his tomb, which was discovered a century ago. But what do we really know about this pharaoh? Crowned at 8 years old and dead at 18, he only reigned for 10 years. His lightning reign took place under supervision. How did this young king become so unmissable? Discover the secret story of one of the most exceptional figures of ancient Egypt.